The morning of May 11th, 1945, radar Picket Station, 1560 miles northwest of Okinawa. Lieutenant Junior Grade Randall Pittman stares at the glowing green screen in USS Hugh W, Hadley's Combat Information Center. Circular sweeps paint returns across the scope. Contacts multiply at the edge of detection range, 55 miles out, too many to count. His voice stays calm when he keys the radio to the combat air patrol circling above. 12 Corsair fighters against what his radar shows as more than 150 incoming aircraft. The mathematics are simple and terrifying. Commander Baron Melany's destroyer and USS Evans stand alone between this massive wave and the transport ships crowded around Okinawa carrying 20,000 American soldiers. For 6 weeks, kamikaze pilots have been destroying American warships with unprecedented effectiveness. Ships that survived years of conventional combat are sinking in minutes. The official Navy damage control doctrine proves inadequate. But something else is happening across the Pacific Fleet, a system born from desperate innovation. Young officers like Pittman, barely out of training, directing fighters from radar-equipped destroyers positioned as sacrificial sentries. Their screens can see death approaching from 75 miles away. Their radios can vector fighters to intercept. Their ships absorb the attacks that would otherwise reach the fleet. Today will prove whether this system works, or whether Hadley will become another name on the growing list of destroyers lost on radar picket duty. The question isn't whether the kamikazes will come. The question is whether early warning can make the difference between survival and destruction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. October 19th, 1944, 1st Air Fleet, Headquarters, Mabalacat Airfield, Philippines. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi faces an impossible situation. He commands 41 operational aircraft. Against him, the largest naval armada ever assembled approaches Leyte Gulf. Conventional attacks have failed catastrophically. Japanese pilots with minimal training cannot compete against veteran Americans flying superior aircraft guided by radar that tracks them from 75 miles away. Onishi proposes something unprecedented: special attack units, pilots who will deliberately crash bomb-laden aircraft into American warships. The human pilot becomes the guidance system itself, compensating for poor training and obsolete equipment through direct control until the moment of impact. One plane, one pilot, one ship destroyed. The calculation seems simple. October 25th, 1944, off Samar Island. A single Zero fighter piloted by Yukio Seki approaches escort carrier USS St. Lo. He dives through anti-aircraft fire. At 10:53 hours, his aircraft crashes through the flight deck. The bomb detonates in the hangar bay among fueled planes. Cascading explosions tear through the ship. Within 30 minutes, St. Lo is sinking. 113 men die. The attack validates Onishi's terrible mathematics. Within days, kamikaze units organize throughout the Philippines. By November 1944, suicide attacks damage or sink more than 30 American vessels. The Navy's multi-layered air defense system, which performed brilliantly against conventional bombing, struggles against this unprecedented threat for fundamental reasons. Traditional air attacks involved bomber formations approaching at altitude, releasing weapons, attempting escape. Radar tracked them early. Combat air patrols intercepted them with time to spare. Anti-aircraft guns engaged multiple targets in sequence. Kamikazes change everything. They approach in small groups or alone, making radar detection difficult against the ocean's clutter. They fly low and fast, often skimming wavetops until the final seconds. When anti-aircraft fire damages them, they don't retreat. Burning aircraft with dying pilots still crash into targets if momentum carries them forward. Most critically, kamikaze impacts deliver not just bomb explosions. They deliver the kinetic energy of entire aircraft moving at 300 miles per hour, plus hundreds of gallons of aviation fuel, plus the explosive payload itself. This combination creates fires and blast damage that overwhelms standard procedures designed for conventional weapons. The problem demands a solution. If kamikazes cannot be stopped by close-in defenses, they must be destroyed farther out. If individual ships cannot generate enough firepower, then fighters must intercept them at distance. If fighters need time to intercept, then radar must detect attacks earlier, much earlier. The answer emerges not from headquarters planners but from tactical necessity. Push destroyers far forward, equip them with the best available radar, assign them fighter direction teams, make them see death approaching while there's still time to stop it. January 1945. Pacific Fleet Headquarters, Pearl Harbor. Planning for Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, accelerates. Staff officers examine maps showing Okinawa's position, 340 miles from Kyushu. Well within range of Japanese air bases. Intelligence estimates thousands of aircraft available for defense. The kamikaze threat will be far worse than anything experienced in the Philippines. Rear Admiral Calvin Durgin proposes an innovation. A ring of radar picket stations surrounding Okinawa, destroyers positioned 40 to 60 miles from the main anchorage, creating an electronic tripwire. Each picket equipped with air search radar capable of detecting aircraft at 75 miles, each carrying a fighter direction team trained to control combat air patrols. Each prepared to absorb attacks that would otherwise reach vulnerable transports and supply ships. The concept builds on lessons from earlier campaigns. At Leyte Gulf, scattered destroyers provided early warning but lacked coordination. At Lingayen Gulf, pickets operated too close to the main force, giving insufficient warning time. Okinawa represents the full development of the system. 16 stations, each designated by number and positioned by range and bearing from Point Bolo on Okinawa's western coast. Stations 1 and 2 directly in the path of aircraft from Kyushu. Station 15 covering approaches from the northeast. Each picket station operates as a miniature battle group, typically 1 or 2 destroyers, preferably Allen M. Sumner-class vessels with their purpose-built combat information centers. Several landing craft support ships adding anti-aircraft firepower, a combat air patrol of 8 to 12 fighters under the destroyer's control. The destroyer serves 3 functions: early warning through radar detection, fighter direction through radio control of the cap, last-ditch defense through its own anti-aircraft battery. The concept is sound. The execution will prove costly. Radar picket destroyers are positioned closer to enemy airfields than any other American vessels. They are isolated from mutual support. They are obvious targets. Experienced sailors recognize the assignment for what it is. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, commanding destroyer operations at Okinawa, later writes that picket duty represents the most hazardous assignment in naval history. The ships operate knowing they will be spotted first, attacked first, and must survive long enough for their early warning to matter. April 1, 1945. L-Day at Okinawa. American troops storm ashore with minimal opposition. The landings proceed with unexpected ease. Japanese commanders are conserving their forces, waiting for the massive kamikaze campaign to begin. For 5 days, only scattered attacks materialize. The radar picket stations are manned but relatively quiet. April 6, 1945. Dawn breaks over radar picket station 1. The destroyer USS Bush takes position 50 miles north of Point Bolo, the most exposed station, the most likely to be hit first. At approximately 0800 hours, radar operators detect multiple contacts approaching from the north. The range is 70 miles. The contacts multiply as the scope refreshes, more than 300 aircraft inbound. Kikusui No. 1 has begun, floating chrysanthemum. The first of 10 massive coordinated attacks the Japanese will launch against the Okinawa invasion force. 355 kamikaze aircraft, accompanied by nearly as many conventional fighters and reconnaissance planes, bear down on the radar picket line. Bush's fighter director team vectors their combat air patrol toward the approaching formations. The radio fills with urgent transmissions. Contacts at 60 miles, contacts at 50 miles. More aircraft detected at multiple altitudes and headings. The mathematics overwhelm any defense. 12 cap fighters against hundreds of aircraft. Bush's gunners track targets through optical sights. The first wave arrives at 0830, aircraft diving from multiple directions simultaneously. Bush's 5-inch guns engage at maximum range. 40mm batteries open fire at closer range. 20mm guns pour fire at point-blank range. One kamikaze crashes into Bush amidships. The bomb detonates in the forward engine room. The ship loses power and begins flooding. Another aircraft strikes minutes later. The forward magazine is threatened. Destroyer USS Colquhoun moves to assist, taking Bush's assigned fighters under her control. Within minutes, Colquhoun is hit by 5 separate kamikazes. Both destroyers are doomed. They remain afloat long enough for crews to abandon ship before other American vessels sink the burning hulks with gunfire to prevent their capture. The pattern repeats across the picket line. Radar Picket Station 2, USS Newcomb fights off multiple attacks. 5 kamikazes crash into the destroyer in 90 minutes. The ship transforms into a burning wreck but remains afloat. 39 men killed, 67 wounded. The ship survives because her crew fights fires that should have consumed her. Radar Picket Station 3, USS Casin Young shoots down 3 attackers. 1 kamikaze clips her mast and explodes overhead. 1 killed, 59 wounded. She remains operational. Across the entire invasion force, 22 kamikazes succeed in crashing into ships. 4 vessels sink. 19 suffer major damage. But the crucial statistic is what doesn't happen. Despite 355 kamikaze aircraft launched, despite overwhelming the radar picket defenses, the attacks do not reach the heart of the invasion fleet. Transports remain largely unmolested. Supply ships continue operations. The amphibious force maintains its schedule. The radar pickets absorb the attacks they were designed to absorb. They detect incoming raids with sufficient time to vector fighters. Combat air patrols shoot down hundreds of aircraft before they reach even the picket line. The picket destroyers themselves account for dozens more. Only a fraction of the massive attack penetrates to the main anchorage. The system works. But the cost to the picket destroyers is catastrophic. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton understands preparation better than most. He witnessed the sinking of the first USS Laffey at Guadalcanal in November 1942. His previous command, USS Aaron Ward, was sunk by Japanese dive bombers on April 7, 1943. 27 men killed, 59 wounded, 2 ships sunk beneath him, 2 ships' companies dead or scattered. The experience teaches him that survival depends on preparation beyond what official doctrine requires. When Beckton takes command of the new USS Laffey in February 1944, he drills his crew relentlessly. Fire drills weekly, sometimes multiple times per week. He cross-trains sailors so damage control parties can operate anywhere on the ship, not just at assigned stations. He positions firefighting equipment throughout the vessel rather than concentrating it in designated lockers as regulations specify. He runs backup fire hoses from alternative water sources. He pre-positions foam canisters near gun positions and areas where aviation fuel might ignite. These modifications violate standard procedure. Regulations call for centralized damage control equipment stored in designated spaces to maintain weight distribution and stability. But Beckton's combat experience tells him where kamikazes will most likely strike. He chooses tactical reality over bureaucratic compliance. His crew doesn't understand the intensity at first. They learn to trust it. April 16, 1945. Radar Picket, Station 1. Laffey takes position in the most dangerous spot in the defensive perimeter, 30 miles northwest of Okinawa. The station that already claimed Bush and Colquhoun 10 days earlier. At 0830 hours, radar detects multiple bogies approaching. What follows is the most concentrated aerial suicide attack ever survived by an American warship. For 80 minutes, 22 separate kamikaze attacks strike Laffey. 6 aircraft crash directly into the destroyer. 4 bombs score direct hits. Fires erupt in 5 locations simultaneously. The forward fire main severs exactly as Beckton predicted. The after-engine room floods. Steering control fails, yet Laffey survives. Damage control parties fight fires using backup hoses. Beckton rigged from alternative pump sources. When gasoline fires erupt near gun positions, firefighting foam is available immediately because equipment was pre-positioned based on tactical analysis. When flames threaten the forward magazine, crews flood it using alternate pumping arrangements tested during drills that officially weren't required. By 1000 hours, Laffey remains afloat and fighting. 32 men killed, 71 wounded. Against 6 direct kamikaze hits and 4 bomb strikes, preparation and training keep her operational. Beckton's after-action report details every action taken during the attack. He documents how intensive training and equipment prepositioning contributed to survival. Within days, his report reaches Admiral Durgin. The commander recognizes that Beckton's approach represents practical solutions to problems the entire fleet faces. The report circulates. Other commanding officers implement similar modifications. The innovations spread not through official channels but through combat experience shared between ships. The pattern emerges across the Pacific Fleet. Aboard USS Franklin, which survived devastating bombing on March 19, 1945, damage control teams demonstrate that standard firefighting procedures are insufficient for aviation fuel fires. Franklin's crew organizes makeshift fire parties using whatever equipment remains operational after the initial attack. The ship's diesel-powered emergency fire pump, started manually after main power fails, provides water pressure that prevents total loss. On destroyers operating radar picket duty, crews begin welding scrap steel plating around gun positions and bridge structures. Official procedure requires Bureau of Ships approval for structural modifications affecting weight distribution and stability. Picket destroyer crews facing daily kamikaze attacks weld armor anyway, using steel salvaged from damaged vessels. The added protection absorbs shrapnel and fire from near misses, keeping gun crews operational longer during sustained attacks. At repair facilities in Ulithi Atoll, Navy construction battalions develop rapid repair techniques that depart from official procedure but restore ships to service within days, instead of months. Standard practice requires damaged sections be cut away and replaced with new steel, fabricated to exact specifications and approved by engineering authorities. Construction battalions at Ulithi cut patches from damaged ships, shape them with cutting torches and sledgehammers, weld them in place using whatever materials are available. The repairs are expedient rather than elegant, but they hold under combat conditions. They get ships back into action when the fleet needs every vessel operational. The specific technical innovations include running secondary fire mains through different routing than primary systems, so a single hit cannot disable all firefighting capability. Crews install additional foam proportioning stations near aviation fuel storage and refueling areas. They weld steel plates around exposed fuel and hydraulic lines in areas where fragments from near misses commonly cause fires. They position portable gasoline-powered pumps as backup systems when electrical power fails. These field modifications share common characteristics. They are developed by sailors with direct combat experience who understand where damage is likely to occur and what systems will fail first. They violate official procedures or lack proper authorization from shore-based engineering authorities. They work under combat conditions. Ships arriving at Okinawa in late May and June 1945 incorporate modifications that earlier vessels improvised under fire. But the radar picket system itself represents the critical innovation, not improvised equipment modifications, though those matter, not intensive damage control training, though that saves lives. The fundamental breakthrough is information, seeing death approaching early enough to do something about it. Inside every radar-equipped destroyer, the Combat Information Center represents a revolution in naval warfare. A darkened room deep in the ship's interior, lit only by glowing radar scopes and plotting boards. Radar operators watch sweeps paint contacts across circular displays. Air search radars detect aircraft at 75 miles. Height-finding radars determine altitude. The information flows to the fighter director officer stationed at the plotting table. These are young men, lieutenants and lieutenant junior grades, most in their early 20s. They haven't been selected for experience. They've been selected for something else: the ability to track multiple contacts simultaneously, the capacity to visualize three-dimensional geometry in their heads, the composure to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. Later analysis will suggest they possess skills remarkably similar to those required for video games that won't be invented for another 40 years. The fighter director officer's job is deceptively simple in concept, impossibly complex in execution. He controls the combat air patrol circling above his ship, usually 8 to 12 Corsair or Hellcat fighters. He sees on his radar where enemy aircraft are approaching. He must vector his fighters to intercept the raiders before they reach the picket destroyers, and ideally before they reach the radar picket line at all. He does this by voice radio, speaking directly to fighter pilots who are flying at 300 miles per hour, often in cloud cover, trying to spot targets that are also flying at 300 miles per hour and actively trying not to be spotted. He must remember each fighter's call sign, fuel state, ammunition remaining, and current position. He must calculate intercept courses in his head, accounting for relative motion between his fighters and their targets. He must prioritize threats, deciding which raid to engage first when multiple formations approach simultaneously. Lieutenant Charlie Ridgway, fighter director for Task Group 58.1 under Rear Admiral Clark, becomes legendary for his performance. During night attacks off the Philippines, Ridgway's voice remains calm, clear, with perfect diction even as torpedoes pass within feet of the task force flagship. His orders are never hesitant. Every intercept vector proves correct. He directs carriers into evasive maneuvers based purely on his radar picture, evading torpedoes that would have sunk them. On the radar picket destroyers at Okinawa, the fighter director officers are less experienced but equally critical. They control smaller combat air patrols with less support and against larger raids. USS Hadley's fighter director team, on the morning of May 11th, tracks 156 inbound aircraft and successfully vectors 12 fighters to shoot down approximately 40 to 50 of them before the main attack reaches the destroyers. The statistics prove the system's effectiveness. During the Okinawa campaign from April through June 1945, Kamikazes conduct more than 1,900 individual attacks. They sink 36 vessels. They damage 368 others. Nearly 5,000 American sailors die. Nearly 5,000 more are wounded. Yet the majority of ships hit by kamikazes survive. More importantly, the vast majority of kamikazes never reach their intended targets. Combat air patrols account for hundreds of aircraft destroyed. The radar picket destroyers themselves shoot down hundreds more. The fighter director's early warning provides the time necessary for these interceptions. Without radar detection at 75 miles, without fighter direction teams vectoring cap to intercept points, without radar picket destroyers positioned to absorb the attacks that penetrate, the kamikaze campaign would have achieved devastating success. The Japanese understand the threat radar pickets represent. By late April 1945, kamikaze tactics evolved to counter American innovations. Pathfinder aircraft equipped with primitive radar detectors probe the picket line, identifying which ships carry the most sophisticated detection equipment. These pathfinders drop chaff, aluminum foil strips that create false returns on American radar screens, attempting to blind the very systems that make the picket defense effective. Some Pathfinder pilots demonstrate remarkable skill, using terrain masking and the radar's own blind spots to penetrate coverage. On April 6th, USS Bush's radar is neutralized by chaff dropped by a Pathfinder just before the main attack arrives. The destroyer fights blind for critical minutes, losing the early warning that might have saved her. The Japanese also discover that American IFF, identification, friend or foe systems, can be exploited. IFF transponders in American aircraft send coded signals when interrogated by friendly radar, allowing radar operators to distinguish friendly aircraft from enemy contacts. By late April, Japanese mechanics salvage IFF equipment from crashed American planes. They install these transponders in kamikaze aircraft. Suddenly, suicide planes begin appearing on radar screens with friendly identification codes. The confusion is immediate and dangerous. Fighter directors hesitate to vector cap against contacts showing as friendly, Radar operators waste precious seconds trying to determine if contacts are legitimate. Lieutenant Commander Leonard Dow, communications officer aboard USS Enterprise, reports that IFF becomes unreliable within weeks of the Okinawa invasion starting. By mid-May, some Picket destroyers abandon IFF entirely, treating all radar contacts as potentially hostile regardless of their identification codes. The decision increases friendly fire risk, but eliminates the more dangerous threat of kamikazes penetrating defenses by masquerading as American aircraft. The Japanese also time attacks for maximum effectiveness. Early raids come during daylight when visibility aids interception. As American defenses improve, attacks shift to dawn and dusk, when low sun angles make visual acquisition difficult. Night attacks increase, though these prove less effective because kamikaze pilots with minimal training struggle to find targets in darkness. Still, the psychological pressure on radar picket crews intensifies. General quarters can last for days. Sailors sleep at their battle stations. Fatigue becomes as dangerous as enemy action. May 11th, 1945, 0740 hours. USS Hugh W. Hadley's radar detects multiple contacts. Commander Melany sounds general quarters. The crew has been at this station for 18 hours already. They're tired, but they're also trained. Hadley's commissioning in November 1944 gave Melany 5 months to drill his crew in the tactics that other ships learned through bitter experience. Destroyer USS Evans takes position alongside Hadley. 4 smaller landing craft support ships form a defensive perimeter, the standard radar picket formation. At 0745, a large enemy float plane appears through morning mist. Both destroyers open fire. The plane turns toward Hadley. Gunners track it through their sights. 5-inch shells detonate around the aircraft. It falls at 1,200 yards range. First kill. At 0755, Hadley's radar shows what the fighter director team has been dreading. Multiple formations. Raid 1, 36 aircraft. Raid 2, 50 aircraft. Raid 3, 20 aircraft. Raid 4, 20 to 30 aircraft. Raid 5, 20 aircraft. Total, 156 enemy planes approaching from the north, distance 55 miles. The combat air patrol consists of 12 Corsairs. The mathematics are brutal, 13 to 1 odds. The fighter director officer orders the entire cap to intercept. His voice remains calm on the radio, vectoring fighters toward the largest formations first. The Corsair pilots acknowledge and turn north, climbing for altitude advantage. Within minutes, the fighter director's radio fills with combat reports. Splash 1, Splash 2. The cap is destroying aircraft, but there are too many targets. At approximately 0800 hours, the first kamikazes reach Hadley and Evans. Both destroyers increase speed to 27 knots, maneuvering violently while maintaining concentrated gunfire. Hadley's gun crews have trained for this moment. Every loader knows his rhythm. Every gunner knows his lead calculations. Every pointer tracks targets with practiced precision. Aircraft approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Some fly extremely low, attempting to pass the formation while heading for Okinawa beyond. Hadley's gunners shoot down 4 of these. Others circle, looking for approach angles that minimize defensive fire exposure. The tempo of engagement overwhelms any possibility of maintaining detailed records. Gun crews fire until barrels overheat. Ammunition handlers form human chains, passing shells from magazines to guns. The fighter director team continues vectoring CAP against incoming raids. Corsairs splash approximately 40 to 50 enemy aircraft before their ammunition runs low and fuel states force them to break off. The radio intercepts of pilot communications tell the story. Targets everywhere, too many to engage. Fighters outnumbered but fighting desperately to keep kamikazes away from the destroyers below. Despite the cap's efforts, the sheer number of attackers overwhelms defensive fire. At approximately 0815, the first kamikaze crashes into Hadley. The aircraft strikes amidships. The bomb detonates on impact. Shrapnel tears through gun positions. Fires erupt immediately. Damage control parties respond within seconds, exactly as they've trained. Hoses unreal. Foam applicators engage gasoline fires. The training works. The fire is contained quickly. But more aircraft are already inbound. At 08:23, a second kamikaze strikes. Then a third. Then a fourth. A Bucker rocket bomb, launched from a bomber and piloted by a suicide volunteer, streaks toward Hadley at over 500 miles per hour. The 2,600-pound warhead detonates amidships with devastating effect. The explosion kills 30 crew members instantly. 67 more are wounded. Fires engulf multiple sections of the ship. The forward fire main is severed. Engineering spaces flood. The fantail settles low in the water as flooding progresses aft. Hadley begins listing to starboard. Commander Melany faces the decision every captain dreads: abandon ship or fight to save her. He chooses a middle course. Order all but 50 crew members into life rafts, retaining only essential damage control personnel. The men who remain work miracles. They isolate flooding by securing watertight doors and hatches against tremendous water pressure. They fight fires in multiple locations using portable pumps when the main fire system proves useless. They shore damaged bulkheads with whatever materials are available. They maintain enough buoyancy that tugboats can eventually tow the crippled destroyer to Karama-Retto anchorage. USS Evans suffers similarly. Multiple kamikaze impacts, severe damage, heavy casualties. Both destroyers are effectively destroyed as fighting ships, but their mission succeeds. The 156 aircraft detected on radar never reach the transport anchorage at Okinawa. The radar picket station absorbs the entire attack. Hadley and Evans, supported by their cap and the smaller support craft, shoot down 23 enemy aircraft themselves, setting a record for aerial victories in a single engagement by surface ships that remains unmatched. The cost is staggering. On Hadley alone, 30 killed, 67 wounded. On Evans, 32 killed, 27 wounded. Both ships are towed to anchorage, then eventually back to the United States. Neither returns to combat, but the transports they protected continue unloading supplies. The amphibious force maintains its schedule. The invasion proceeds. This is the brutal calculus of radar picket duty. Destroyers worth perhaps $20 million in 1945 currency, crewed by 300 men each, positioned to absorb attacks that would otherwise strike transports carrying thousands of soldiers and irreplaceable equipment. The radar gives early warning. The fighter directors vector interceptors. The picket destroyers fight to the last. Some survive, some don't. All serve their purpose. The Bureau of Ships Investigation completed in late 1945 documents the factors determining survival. Ships with intensive damage control training survive at significantly higher rates than those relying on standard procedures. Ships whose commanding officers implemented field modifications before attacks survive more often than those that didn't. Ships with experienced crews who cross-trained for multiple roles survive better than ships with minimal crews and rigid specialization. The statistical evidence is compelling. Of 101 destroyers assigned to radar picket stations during the Okinawa campaign, 10 are sunk and 32 are damaged by kamikaze attacks. The survival rate is 79%, despite being positioned in the most exposed locations and facing the most intense attacks. Compare this to the 19 ships hit during the first kamikaze attacks in the Philippines, where survival rates were lower because crews lacked the training and modifications that Okinawa veterans developed. The 88 landing craft support ships assigned to picket stations have 2 sunk and 11 damaged. The 11 landing ship medium rocket ships have 3 sunk and 2 damaged. These smaller vessels, with lighter armor and smaller crews, actually show better survival rates than destroyers in some cases. The reason appears to be their higher proportion of anti-aircraft guns to displacement. More 40s and 20s per ton means more effective close-in defense. The fighter director teams prove essential. Task Force 58 analyzes kamikaze attacks throughout the campaign. They document that raids intercepted by fighter directors at distance suffer 70 to 80% losses before reaching the picket line. Raids that penetrate without interception hit targets at much higher rates. The difference is early warning combined with effective fighter control. See the threat. Vector the cap. Destroy the threat before it arrives. Lieutenant Stan Foote, Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58 Combat Information Center officer during the Okinawa campaign, later describes the fighter director's task as playing a deadly real-time three-dimensional chess game, where pieces move at 300 miles per hour, and losing means ships sink. The best fighter directors demonstrate certain characteristics: relative youth, usually under 30, quick decision-making ability, capacity to visualize spatial relationships instantly, clear communication under pressure. These traits cannot be taught effectively. They must be selected for. The Navy's Fighter Director Training School at Pearl Harbor develops screening methods to identify candidates with appropriate aptitudes. By mid-1945, the selection process includes tests measuring reaction time, spatial reasoning, multitasking ability, and stress tolerance. Officers who would make excellent line commanders sometimes wash out of fighter director training because they lack the specific cognitive skills required. Conversely, some junior officers with unremarkable records elsewhere excel at fighter direction because their mental processes suit the task perfectly. This represents a significant shift in naval thinking. Traditional officer selection emphasized leadership, tactical knowledge, and seamanship. Fighter direction requires different skills: the ability to process information from multiple sources simultaneously, the capacity to make rapid calculations without conscious thought, the composure to maintain clear communication while under attack. These are not traditional naval officer qualities. They're something new, something the radar age demands. The modern Navy's damage control training program uses experiences from Okinawa as primary case studies. Laffey's survival demonstrates that intensive training and tactical equipment positioning matter more than armor, thickness, or ship size. Franklin's experience shows that backup systems and redundant capabilities enable survival when primary systems fail. Hadley's battle proves that well-trained crews can keep fighting even after suffering catastrophic damage. The innovations developed during the Kamikaze campaign become permanent features of naval design and doctrine. Collective protection systems providing redundant firefighting capability evolve from backup hoses crews rigged at Okinawa. Pre-positioned firefighting equipment near probable impact points becomes standard practice rather than a violation of regulations. Running redundant fire mains through separate routing so a single hit cannot disable all capability becomes required design practice for new construction. Pre-action foam systems in aviation fuel storage areas develop from techniques improvised aboard carriers. Installing supplementary armor around critical spaces, once unauthorized field modifications, becomes engineered design features. Damage control training, emphasizing rapid response and tactical adaptation, continues the philosophy that survival depends on thinking sailors applying sound principles, not merely following written procedures. The principle extends beyond specific techniques. Effective organizations empower people closest to problems to develop solutions. Commander Beckton preparing Laffey. Construction battalions at Ulithi, developing rapid repair methods. Gun crews welding armor plates without authorization. These actions violate bureaucratic procedure but serve tactical necessity. The Navy's willingness to accept and incorporate these innovations, rather than punish the violations, represents organizational learning under extreme pressure. Post-war analysis confirms observations made during combat. The Navy's Bureau of Ship Statistical Analysis completed in 1946 reviews wartime data. Ships with aggressive, well-trained damage control parties survived kamikaze hits at significantly higher rates than ships relying on minimal crews and standard procedures. The study examines 212 ships hit by kamikazes during Okinawa. 36 sank, 176 survived. Surviving ships averaged twice as many damage control personnel assigned, conducted drills 3 times more frequently, and had implemented field modifications at twice the rate of vessels that sank. The statistical correlation is undeniable. Preparation determines survival. Training saves lives. Tactical flexibility trumps rigid compliance with outdated doctrine. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton, who commanded Laffey through her April 16th ordeal, retires as Rear Admiral in 1966 after a distinguished career. Throughout his service, he emphasizes that Laffy's survival resulted from crew training and preparation that exceeded official requirements. Beckton's insistence on intensive damage control drills, equipment prepositioning based on tactical analysis, and cross-training becomes a model for destroyer operations throughout the Cold War and beyond. The radar picket concept itself evolves. During the early Cold War, the threat shifts from kamikaze aircraft to Soviet bombers, potentially carrying nuclear weapons. The Navy converts submarines to radar picket duty, reasoning that submarines can dive when under attack while surface ships cannot. USS Requin and USS Spinax receive rudimentary conversions in 1946 with SR-2 search radars and SV-2 height finders mounted on their afterdecks. Later conversions are more sophisticated, cutting submarines in two and inserting 24-foot sections to accommodate expanded combat information centers and electronic spaces. The submarine radar pickets prove that the fundamental concept remains sound. Early warning matters. Detecting threats at maximum range provides time to respond. Whether the platform is a destroyer, a submarine, or eventually an airborne early warning aircraft, the principle remains constant. See first. React first. Survive. Modern naval vessels reflect design features that trace directly to 1945 improvisations. The Aegis combat system's emphasis on simultaneous multi-target engagement evolves from lessons learned when single ships faced dozens of attackers. The principle that defensive systems must handle saturation attacks comes directly from Okinawa, where individual ships faced more targets than their fire control systems could track using pre-war doctrine. Network-centric warfare, where ships share radar and fire control data to create integrated defensive zones, builds on the radar picket concept of distributed sensors and coordinated response. The destroyer positioned far forward is now connected to the entire battle group through data links, but the fundamental role remains unchanged. Extend the sensor horizon, provide early warning, coordinate the defense. The human element persists. Modern combat information centers are more sophisticated than their World War II predecessors. Digital displays replace analog radar scopes, computer-aided tracking replaces manual plotting, but the officer directing the defense still makes decisions under pressure with incomplete information. The requirement for rapid spatial reasoning, clear communication, and composure under stress hasn't changed. The tools are better. The task remains fundamentally the same. The sailors who survived Okinawa became carriers of institutional knowledge that shaped the post-war Navy. Many served careers spanning decades, training subsequent generations of damage control, specialists, and combat information center personnel. They ensured that lessons purchased with blood would not be lost. They insisted that training matter more than manuals. They proved that preparation determines survival. Others returned to civilian life but brought understanding that effective organizations empower people to solve problems. The mechanic who welded unauthorized armor, the damage control specialist who rigged backup hoses against regulations, the fighter director who ignored doctrine to vector fighters more effectively. These actions saved lives. The Navy's willingness to learn from them, rather than punish violations of procedure, demonstrates institutional flexibility that many organizations lack. The legacy extends beyond the Navy. The principle that those facing problems understand those problems better than distant commanders applies broadly. The recognition that preparation matters more than perfect compliance has implications for any organization facing crisis. The understanding that training and empowerment enable survival translates across contexts. The statistical measure of achievement appears in survival rates and mission accomplishment. Despite 1,900 kamikaze attacks over 4 months, despite 36 ships sunk and more than 400 damaged, the Pacific Fleet maintained operational effectiveness throughout the campaign. The Japanese never achieved the decisive blow they sought. The fleet absorbed punishment that would have crippled any previous naval force and continued fighting. This resilience was built by thousands of individual acts of initiative, preparation, and courage. Commander Melany training Hadley's crew beyond minimum standards. Commander Beckton drilling Laffy's damage control parties relentlessly. Lieutenant Pittman remaining calm while vectoring fighters against overwhelming odds. Construction battalion sailors developing rapid repair techniques. Gun crews welding armor at midnight using salvaged steel. These actions, multiplied across hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of sailors, determined the outcome. The radar made early warning possible. The fighter directors made coordinated defense possible. The intensive training made survival possible. But the fundamental factor was human. Sailors refusing to accept defeat, finding ways to fight fires when standard equipment failed, improvising repairs with available materials, persisting despite fear and exhaustion. The technology mattered, the tactics mattered, the people mattered most. In the final analysis, wars are won not by technology or grand strategy alone, but by ordinary people refusing to quit. The mechanics and damage control specialists who improvised solutions at Okinawa weren't seeking recognition. They wanted to survive and help their shipmates survive. They found ways to keep fighting. They shared what they learned. They trained beyond requirements. They modified their ships to meet tactical realities. They did what was necessary, rather than merely what was authorized. This spirit of practical adaptation under pressure represents their most important legacy. Not specific equipment modifications or procedures, though those remain relevant, not the radar picket system itself, though that concept endures in modern form. The enduring lesson is that effective forces empower individuals to think, adapt, and solve problems independently when circumstances demand it. The radar didn't save the destroyers at Okinawa. The fighter directors didn't save them. The training didn't save them. The combination saved them. Early warning providing time, fighter direction providing coordination, training providing capability, preparation providing resilience, innovation providing adaptation, courage providing persistence. These factors working together enabled survival against unprecedented threats. The title asks, how destroyers survived kamikazes. The answer is neither simple nor singular. They survived through radar that extended vision beyond the horizon, through fighter directors who translated radar contacts into intercepted raids, through intensive training that exceeded official requirements, through field modifications that violated procedure but served necessity, through crews who refused to surrender even when their ships were burning and sinking beneath them. They survived because the Navy learned rapidly from experience, because commanders like Beckton prepared their ships before attacks rather than after, because fighter directors like Ridgway mastered skills that hadn't existed 5 years earlier, because sailors throughout the fleet shared innovations rather than hoarding advantages, because the institution valued results over compliance, adaptation over rigidity, survival over procedure. Most fundamentally, they survived because they had to. The alternative was unacceptable. The transports at Okinawa carried the force that would end the war. The supplies flowing through that anchorage sustained the campaign. The ships anchored there represented America's bridge to Japan. The radar picket destroyers stood between that vital force and destruction. They had to hold. So they did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.